Welcome. If you enjoy imagining nights by the fireplace, quiet stone halls, ancient castles, and life in medieval villages, you've found your resting place. Subscribe for more peaceful stories from a quieter, older world. Now, let's begin. The sky had not always looked like this. So soft, so forgiving. For weeks, for months, the air had been still and dense, or bitter and biting, or heavy with smoke from candles lit for morning. But now, as the sun leaned low over the hills and reached its golden fingers across the valley, it felt like the world itself was exhaling, a long-held breath let go. You stood just beyond the edge of your cottage, barefoot in the narrow patch of green that had begun to reappear among the hard-packed earth. The grass was shy this year, patchy and low, but it had returned, and with it, so had something else. A feeling, maybe, one you hadn't dared give a name to yet, but it lived there, in your chest, warm and slow and steady. The village was quiet, but not in the same way it had been during the darkest days. Then, the silence had been thick, hollow, a kind of absence that settled into doorways and behind window panes, as if the air itself had been afraid to speak. Now the quiet was a different thing altogether. Now, it was rest. It was stillness, not fear. It was the sound of something old and aching beginning to remember how to be alive. A cart rolled gently down the lane behind you, its wooden wheels creaking as it passed over smooth stones worn by years of feet and hooves. You turned slightly to watch it, a familiar face at the reins, someone who had once sold honey at the summer fair. His shoulders stooped more now, but his hands held the reins. He was guiding something forward. You nodded to him. He nodded back. Nothing needed to be said. The shared glance was enough. You pulled your shawl closer around your shoulders. The fabric was rough woven and familiar, its edges frayed but still whole. It smelled faintly of smoke and herbs and of your own skin. You hadn't needed it earlier in the day when the sun was high. But now as the light slanted lower, the breeze carried a coolness with it, clean and new, like water from the well after a long drought. You looked out toward the hills. The trees there had begun to leaf again, tiny greens poking out from twisted branches. Birds moved between them, calling out in bursts that were hesitant at first, then growing bolder. Their songs had returned only recently. For so long they had stayed away, as if they too had sensed the illness in the soil, the breathlessness of the world. But they were back now, not in flocks, not in choirs, but in pairs, in solo voices, in quiet, careful offerings of music. From your doorway, you could see the chapel at the far end of the village. Its roof had been patched with mismatched tiles, some red, some black, some pale gray, but it stood firm. The bell tower was still. For months that bell had tolled daily, not for mass, not for celebration, but for loss, for names, for the sound of parting. Today, it did not ring. It had not rung in several days now. That was how you measured time lately. Not in numbers or dates, but in the presence or absence of that sound. The villagers had grown used to it, the way one grows used to the creak of an old door or the whisper of a draft. But now that it had stopped, the quiet it left behind felt new again. Not eerie, just still. You stepped back inside your cottage. The wooden floor groaned underfoot. a familiar song of soft protest. The hearth was cold but clean. You had swept it that morning, removing the last of the soot that had clung there from long nights spent keeping watch. There were fewer candles now, fewer herbs hanging from the rafters. You'd stopped needing to ward the air. On the table sat a bowl of dried lentils, a wedge of bread, and a small dish of salt. Simple things, but they felt precious. There had been weeks when even these were gone, when you'd traded memories for food, an old apron for grain, a keepsake comb for oil. Now, slowly, things returned. No abundance, but enough. A few petals from the dried lavender bunch on the shelf had fallen to the table. You brushed them gently to the side with the tips of your fingers, watching them drift like whispers to the floor. Outside again, the breeze shifted. You heard the slow creak of shutters being opened across the lane. One by one, little by little, windows that had been closed against the world were opening again. Cloth drapes fluttered, and a pale hand reached out to shake dust from a cushion. You recognized the hand. You had not seen its owner for many weeks. You smiled. The gesture was small, but so was the first bud before the blossom. You walked to the fence that circled the back garden. It had slumped slightly in the rainstorms of early spring, and one of the stakes was loose. You pressed it gently back into the soil, not firmly, just enough to tell the fence you still cared. The earth around it was damp and cool. When you brought your fingers to your nose, they smelled of loam and something else. Life. A sparrow landed near your feet. It cocked its head at you, then hopped once, twice, and took flight again. You followed it with your eyes until it disappeared into the low branches of the ash tree at the end of the lane. The ash had survived. Not every tree had. Not every soul had. But this one stood tall, its trunk mottled with lichen, and its base ringed by tufts of new grass. You remembered tying ribbons to its branches during the midsummer festival years ago, and you wondered if the children would dance around it again someday. You hoped so. Not soon, but someday. Back in the village square, someone was sweeping. The sound came faint, but clear, the rhythmic scrape of bristles over stone. You turned toward it instinctively, eyes finding the movement. It was the baker's son. His father had passed weeks ago, but the boy was older now. You could see it in the way he held the broom, not like a chore, not like a child, like someone learning to carry something. The square itself was still mostly empty. No carts, no vendors, no laughter. But the stones had been cleaned of soot and ash. The corners no longer held offerings or burnt incense. The prayer candles that once flickered in glass jars were gone. Their wax melted and wiped away. In their place stood flowers, not in bouquets, not arranged, just placed. A daisy on a windowsill, a sprig of thyme on a doorstep, a single yellow petal floating in the water trough by the well. You had placed that one yourself. You hadn't even thought much about it when you did it, only that the color had felt right, that it should be somewhere visible, that something soft should meet the eyes of anyone who passed by. That night, you dreamed of spring. Now, here you were, living in it. Or something close. The sun had begun to lower behind the hill, and the sky had taken on that faint pink gold tint that only lasts for minutes at the end of the day. You stood still, letting it brush your face. The shawl around your shoulders shifted in the breeze again, and you pulled it tighter, not because you were cold, but because the weight of it felt right, familiar, steady. A bell rang faintly, not the chapel bell, but the little hand bell carried by the old woman who had once marked the time for the village children. You hadn't heard it in months, but now it rang 3 times. Clear, slow, a call to return home before dark. You closed your eyes, not to sleep, not yet, just to be in the sound for a moment, to feel the air on your skin, to listen to the wind moving through the narrow alleys and up between the eaves of the cottages, to feel the slow, deep heartbeat of a village beginning to remember itself. When you opened your eyes again, the stars had begun to prick at the edges of the sky, just 1 or 2, faint and far away. But present, you watched them appear, one by one, steady, unrushed, like breath returning to a long-held silence. Morning came not with fanfare, but with birdsong. It was the kind of morning that arrived gently. No rush, no sudden brightness, just a slow warming of light through the shutters, the steady unfolding of day across the rooftops of the village. The roosters had crowed early, as they always had, but you hadn't stirred at first. You let the sound pass over you like water. Only when the sun touched your eyelids, gold through the cracks in the shutters, did you rise. The cottage smelled of wood smoke and wool. Your blanket had fallen halfway to the floor, and you pulled it back around your shoulders as you sat on the edge of the bed. Your feet met the cool wood with a soft thud, and you pressed them flat against the floor, breathing in slowly, letting your body remember itself. It was the first day in a long time you didn't wake with a knot in your chest. The ache of worry, of checking if a fever had arrived in the night, of wondering which house across the village might be mourning next. That ache had quieted. It had not vanished. Grief leaves behind echoes. But today, you did not wake in fear. You moved slowly through your morning, lighting the small hearth, setting a pot of oats to simmer, washing your face in a basin by the window. The water was cold, but it cleared the last haze of sleep from your mind. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. You could hear it, even before stepping into the street. The clink of a pail at the well, the scrape of a broom on stone, the low murmur of voices, 2, maybe 3, spoken with care, not loud enough to wake anyone still dreaming, but no longer hushed as they had been during the worst days. You wrapped your shawl tighter and stepped out into the lane. The sun touched everything gently, the mossy edges of the cottages, the bundled hay near the barn, the thatch roof slick with dew. The world smelled of wet grass and cooling ash, the scent of the village not quite scrubbed clean, but softened. A few steps down the path, you passed your neighbor, Thomas, kneeling beside his front step, repairing the stones that had crumbled during the winter. He looked up, met your eyes, and gave a small nod. You offered one in return. Neither of you spoke. The quiet between you was not awkward, it was full of shared understanding, full of relief that didn't need to be named. You moved on, your feet crunching gently on the gravel. The breeze stirred the hem of your tunic, and you paused by the garden wall just to feel the air again. It carried warmth, real warmth. Not the dry, bitter heat of a fevered summer, but the kind that came with planting, with baking bread, with animals stretching in the pasture. A low bleat from the edge of the field caught your ear. One of the goats had gotten her head stuck through the fence again, and the farmer's daughter, perhaps 11 or 12 now, was gently trying to coax her back. You watched as the girl murmured softly, her hands calm, her movements patient. A moment later, the goat pulled back, unharmed and chewing calmly, as if nothing had happened. The girl glanced up, caught your eye, and smiled. It was a small thing, but it glowed. You walked further into the village center, past the bakery, now open for the first time in what felt like ages. The smell of flour and wood-fired ovens hung in the air. A small queue had formed. Only a few people, each standing with polite space between them. Not out of fear now, but respect. Everyone carried baskets, most stood in silence. But here and there, you heard snippets of quiet conversation. They say, the barley harvest may come early this year. The blacksmith has reopened his forge. I saw her walking this morning by the chapel with her youngest. Each word was like a stitch, pulling the torn edges of the village back together, little by little. You joined the line, your hands folded over the handle of your empty basket. When it was your turn, the baker's wife handed you a round loaf with a crust that crackled faintly as you took it. She didn't charge you. She only met your gaze and said, "It's good to see you up and about." You nodded. Your voice was caught in your throat, but the warmth in her eyes made words unnecessary. Further down the lane, you passed the carpenter's workshop. The shutters had been opened wide, letting sunlight in. The smell of sawdust drifted through the air, soft and familiar. The old man who worked the wood was bent over a table, sanding down a beam. His dog lay nearby, tongue out, tail thumping softly against the floor. A young apprentice stood to one side, sorting nails. The rhythmic sound of work, sanding, hammering, placing, created its own kind of music. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting it fill your chest. You wandered to the chapel steps, which now served more as a gathering place than a sanctuary. 2 older women sat nearby on a bench, sewing quietly, their hands nimble despite the wear of grief. They stitched patches onto cloaks, onto sleeves worn thin over the last season. One of them looked up as you passed. She gestured to the empty spot beside her. You hesitated only a moment before sitting. A third woman handed you a scrap of fabric and a threaded needle. You said nothing. They said nothing. You began to sew. The village didn't need noise, it needed hands. Hands working, mending, placing one thread after another. The stitches weren't perfect. The lines wobbled. The thread tangled once or twice. But it held. The cloth held. You stayed like that for a while, the sun slowly climbing toward its highest point, your fingers warming against the soft cotton of a well-worn cloak. When you stood again, your back ached slightly, but it felt good, useful, alive. The rest of the day unfolded gently. You saw a boy carrying a bucket of fresh water, sloshing it onto his boots with each step. You watched a woman sweep the leaves from her doorstep, and then simply stand in the sunlight. You heard the faint sound of a flute drifting down from someone's open window. At one point, you paused beside the well and dipped your hands into the cool water, letting it pool in your palms. You drank slowly. The water was sweet. It tasted of stone and sky and the season ahead. You looked around the square and felt something you hadn't felt in many weeks. Not just relief, not just endurance, but rhythm. The rhythm of life returning. Of labor, not heavy, not forced, but shared. Quiet. Measured. Someone was rebuilding the wheelbarrow that had collapsed last fall. Another was spreading seed in the garden that had gone untended for too long. You passed the weaver's shop and saw a child holding a scrap of blue wool, running their fingers along its edge as if it were treasure. You caught sight of your reflection in a window pane and paused. Your face looked different than it had in the deepest weeks of sickness. There were lines of fatigue still, a hollowness in the eyes that would take longer to leave, but there was color again in your cheeks. There was breath in your chest. You looked like someone living, and the village around you looked like a home again. Not perfect, not whole, but alive. You returned to your cottage in the late afternoon, basket heavier now, bread, eggs, and a small pouch of dried herbs gifted to you by the healer's apprentice. She'd smiled as she handed it over, saying it would help with sleep, as if sleep now might be a safe thing again. You set the basket down on the table, washed your hands in the basin, and lit the hearth. A soft fire took hold, not large, just enough to warm the cottage and welcome evening in. You cut a slice of bread, tore it in half, and ate slowly. Each bite felt like ceremony. Outside, the light dimmed. The shadows grew longer. The bird song softened. You moved to your window, placing your palms flat on the sill. The scent of smoke from a neighbor's fire drifted in. You breathed it in, deep and slow. Across the lane, a man lit a lantern and hung it by his door. Its light glowed pale gold, like a promise. You stood there unmoving, as dusk settled into every corner of the village. As the world grew quiet again, not with fear, but with peace. Tomorrow, there would be more work to do. The garden to tend, the roof to patch, the walls to reinforce before summer storms arrived. But tonight was enough. The mending had begun, and the world, in its own quiet way, was beginning to hum again. The morning began with the sound of bread being sliced, not in your own home, but just beyond the shutters, at the cottage next door. You could hear it through the thin air and quiet, the soft scrape of a knife against a wooden board, the gentle rattle of crust flaking away. Then a pause, then the faint clink of a cup being set down. Ordinary sounds, everyday things. But this morning, they landed with the weight of ceremony. You rose slowly, not because you were tired, but because something inside you insisted on taking this moment slowly. The light through the window was soft and golden, and as you moved to unfasten the shutters, it poured in like a blessing. Dust motes drifted in the beams, swirling in quiet spirals. You watched them for a long time before stepping away. Today was the first feast day the village would mark together again. Not a feast in the grand sense. There would be no lavish spread, no dancers, no pipers on platforms, but a shared meal, a table laid out in the square, an altar cleaned and redressed, a day to honor the changing of seasons and those who did not live to see it. The last time the day had come, the chapel had been shuttered. The bells had stayed silent. This time the bell would ring once at midday. You dressed carefully, not in your finest. No one was dressing in finery these days, but in a clean tunic, sleeves rolled and apron tied neatly. You brushed your hair with deliberate strokes, pinning it back with the carved wooden clasp your grandmother had given you. It was one of the few belongings you hadn't considered trading during the worst weeks. Today, you were glad you'd kept it. Outside, the lane was already busy, but not chaotic. The movement of the villagers had its own rhythm, quiet, certain, like an old dance remembered in the body. A pair of boys carried stools down to the square. A young mother swept the walkway in front of her door, her daughter trailing behind her with a cloth-wrapped bundle of wildflowers. The baker's boy rode a cart with loaves stacked high, shouting gentle greetings as he passed. "Morning to you. Save me a corner crust. Don't eat it all before you get there." There was laughter, real, round and full. You smiled at it, then made your way to the chapel with a basket on your arm. Inside it, a small bowl of stewed lentils, a cloth-wrapped wedge of hard cheese, 2 rolls, and a single apple. Enough to contribute, enough to share. The chapel stood with its doors flung wide open. For the first time in over a year, the altar had been polished. Its cloth, a deep, dusty blue, hung freshly laundered, and beside it stood a vase of rosemary and thyme, their scent rising warmly into the air. Several people had gathered already, placing offerings of food and herbs and small tokens in the baskets arranged at the front. You placed yours with the others and gave a small nod to the healer who stood beside the door. Her eyes met yours, and without words, she passed you a folded slip of linen. Inside was a bit of lavender and yarrow. "For peace," she said softly. You tucked it into your apron pocket and moved to help arrange the benches outside. Throughout the morning, more people arrived. Some carried loaves, others jars of preserved fruit, bunches of herbs, or carefully wrapped pies. Children darted through the crowd like birds, laughter trailing behind them like ribbons. Someone began plucking the strings of a lute, not a song exactly, but notes, one after another, like testing the voice of an instrument too long silent. You took your place at the edge of the long wooden table now being set. It was just a pair of planks, balanced on old barrels and crates, but it held its shape well. You laid out cutlery, wiped down mugs, helped place folded cloths where they could. No one gave orders. People simply saw what was needed and stepped forward. The sun climbed slowly, golden and benevolent. At midday, the chapel bell rang once. Its sound rang out over the hills, clear, long, and low. People paused where they stood. Heads bowed, hands stilled. No formal prayer was spoken. None was needed. The bell was enough. Its toll carried every name, every breath, every tear shed, and every breath yet to come. Then slowly, the movement resumed. The shared meal began. There were no long speeches, no formal seating, just the quiet clink of mugs being filled, the murmur of appreciation for warm bread. The smile passed from one person to the next as they broke cheese into hunks and offered fruit to nearby children. You sat beside the woman who ran the dye shop, her hands permanently stained with color, and across from the shepherd who'd lost half his flock, and his father. He said little, but his eyes were kind. You offered him a fig. He accepted. Someone began to sing. You didn't recognize the melody at first, just a low, winding tune, like a lullaby sung from across a room. Then others joined in. No harmony, no instruments, just voices, soft and varied. Old voices, young voices, voices that cracked in the throat but kept going anyway. It wasn't a hymn. It was older than that. A harvest song, perhaps. Or one sung at the start of spring when the first sprouts broke through the frost. You hummed quietly along, not needing to know the words. By mid-afternoon, the food had dwindled, but the warmth had grown. Small groups lingered around the edges of the square. Two boys challenged each other to balance on the edge of the stone well, arms flailing for fun. A girl showed her friends how to braid grass into bracelets. An older man recited a joke that made several people groan, and one burst out laughing in surprise. You noticed the carpenter's daughter tying flowers to the chapel's doorframe with twine. You joined her. The stems were uneven, the blooms mismatched, but beautiful all the same. She handed you a handful of petals, and you tucked them into the crook of the frame, careful not to crush them. When you were done, you stepped back and looked at the archway now lined with color. "It's not perfect," she said quietly. "No," you agreed, "but it's good." As the sun began its slow descent toward the hills, people started returning home. You stayed a while longer, helping gather the plates, wiping the benches, carrying the empty jugs to be cleaned. The lute player was still strumming in the distance, now joined by someone on a reed flute. Their tune was slow, wandering, half-finished, but full of something new. Joy, maybe, or simply peace. On your walk home, the wind carried the scent of loam and baked fruit. You passed a line of herbs drying outside a cottage, their scent familiar and anchoring. A mother rocked a baby on her stoop. The baby was quiet, eyes wide, watching, learning the sounds of a village returning to itself. You reached your cottage and paused by the gate. A bird landed on the fence post, brown and soft and wholly unremarkable, and chirped once, then flew away. Inside, you placed your linen pouch beside your bed, added a bit of mint to the hearth tea, and watched the embers grow. You kicked off your shoes, stretched your feet, and sat down with the ease of someone who had done a full day's work, not out of obligation, but of belonging. The bell had rung. The food had been shared. The song had been sung. You had tied flowers to a chapel door, not because you had to, because you could. And tomorrow you would do something else. Not all things, not everything at once, but something. and that was enough. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear again, their quiet arrival a ritual all its own. You watched them from your window, not in prayer, not in longing, but in witness. And you let your breath slow, your body soften, your heart rest. The sound of a spade slicing into earth carried farther than you might expect in the early morning hush. You could hear it from where you stood beside your garden gate, hands tucked into the folds of your apron. A steady rhythm, each thrust met by a short exhale. Across the narrow lane, Marna, the widow who'd once taught all the village children their letters, was digging. Her hands, once more familiar with chalk and parchment, now gripped the worn wooden handle of a spade with quiet determination. The plot she worked wasn't large, just enough for a few rows of beans and maybe a patch of onions, but it was something. And you could see by the way she moved that she was letting the earth carry something for her. Something heavy, not grief, not exactly, that had rooted itself too deep to lift now, but something near it, the weight of a season past. You turned toward your own plot and bent to work. It wasn't much. No one's garden was this year, but your soil, though crusted with spring's chill and a scatter of old wind-blown leaves, was forgiving. As your fingers dug through the top layers, loosening what had hardened over the winter, you found pockets of softness, life, waiting. The first thing you planted was not food, but a row of marigolds, bright and stubborn little things. Their seeds were small as pinheads, yet everyone held a golden promise. Your mother had always said, marigolds guarded a garden, not just against pests, but against ill luck. You did not believe in such things as you once had, or perhaps you did. But now it felt less like superstition and more like tradition, something held and handed down in love. The sun had not yet crested the chapel spire when the first voice called out across the lane, "Anyone have sprigs of mint?" You looked up to see Thomas, the smith's apprentice, his face flushed and hair still mussed from sleep. A hand raised, hopeful. From behind a shutter, someone replied, "I've got lemon balm. I'll take it." And so, the exchange began. Not of coin, but of things grown and stored and remembered. A jar of chickpeas for a clutch of early eggs, a pot of honey for a roll of twine. The children became messengers, darting from stoop to stoop, delivering bunches of rosemary, mismatched spools of thread, a single duck egg wrapped in cloth like a treasure. At the far edge of the village, near the tree line, the old field had been opened again. You made your way there after tending your small garden, shawl draped loosely over your shoulders, basket in hand. The footpath was narrower than you remembered, overgrown and wild, but familiar underfoot. You passed a hedgerow heavy with dew, a mossy boulder where bees were already beginning to stir, and a narrow brook, its waters trickling clear between polished stones. When you arrived, you found more the village had gathered than you'd expected. A dozen or more, standing in a loose circle around the field, tools in hand, boots muddy. They did not speak at first, they only looked. The land had gone fallow over the past year. The furrows were barely visible now, softened by time and the creeping roots of wildflowers. The grass had grown high in some parts, low in others, but there was something beautiful about it, its quiet resilience. the way it had held space while the world above it trembled. Then, without instruction, someone began to walk the perimeter. Others followed, a slow procession, not unlike those once made for planting blessings or summer rites. You stepped in beside Marna, the school teacher, her spade now resting against her shoulder. "What are we doing?" she whispered, half laughing. "Blessing it, I think," you replied. She nodded, and together you walked the length of the field's edge, boots brushing through grass that hissed softly in the breeze. When the circuit was complete, someone took up a hoe and began to break the earth. It was hard work, not the kind that exhausted, but the kind that demanded presence. With every turn of soil, the village released something. Layers of stillness, remnants of fear, the stiff silence that had clung to your bones in colder months. You dug in pairs and small groups, trading tools, sharing water, pausing to stretch and laugh. The children played nearby, gathering flowers and stacking flat stones into cairns. One girl, her cheeks smudged with dirt, handed you a daisy without a word. You tucked it behind your ear. As the morning wore on, the sun warmed the backs of your necks and the field began to change shape. What had looked wild now bore the marks of order, not strict rows, not symmetry, but intention. A garden of community, not perfection. Someone fetched a jug of cider from the chapel cellar, and mugs passed from hand to hand. You drank in slow sips, the tartness sweetened by the warmth of the day and the comfort of calloused hands beside you. Under an oak tree at the field's edge, a group had gathered to sort seed. There was barley and rye, radish and leek, squash and turnip. Some of the seeds were old, taken from last year's store. Others had been found in the pockets of coats worn only at festival time. One small bag, tied with blue ribbon, had been left anonymously on the chapel step 2 days prior. "It feels like planting magic," someone murmured. "Is there any other kind?" came the reply. By late afternoon, the field had been half turned, half planted. It was not finished, but it did not need to be. The land was forgiving. It had waited this long. It would wait another day. You sat in the grass with a piece of crusty bread and an apple from someone's basket. Bees buzzed nearby. Your muscles ached, pleasantly. The wind shifted and brought the scent of thyme and damp stone. Nearby, the smith's apprentice strummed a lyre with clumsy fingers, humming tunelessly to himself. A boy beat a soft rhythm on the upturned belly of a water jug. No one danced. No one clapped. But the music settled over the gathering like a blanket. As shadows grew long and the sky took on its evening blush, you helped gather tools, tie sacks of leftover seed, and stack crates. A few lanterns were lit. Smoke began curling from chimneys in the distance. On the way home, your boots felt heavier, but your steps did not. You paused at the brook, dipping your hands into the cold water. It rushed around your fingers, clean and steady, carrying small pebbles and fragments of leaves downstream. You watched it for a long time, feeling the way it moved without fear. When you reached your cottage, you set your boots by the door and peeled off your outer tunic. It smelled of earth and sunlight. You folded it carefully and placed it on the stool beside your hearth. That night, you cooked simply, just a stew of barley and wild onion, a bit of lentil, a pinch of salt. The scent filled the room, wrapping around the wooden beams, rising into the air like incense. You lit a single candle, and let it flicker as you ate. Outside, the stars returned again. This time you didn't wait at the window. You stepped outside, barefoot, standing just beyond the doorway in the cool dirt. Above you, the sky stretched wide and dark and full. Somewhere in the field, seeds lay nestled in fresh-turned earth, and the land dreamed with you. You awoke before the sun, not startled, not rushed, just quietly aware that the day was waiting. The stillness in the room was complete. Even the birds had not yet begun to stir outside the shutters. The faint scent of lavender from the sprig tucked by your bedside lingered in the cool air, and your blanket, warm and rough against your skin, felt like part of the night still clinging to you. You stayed there for a moment, not quite moving. The world was paused, and so were you. Then, with a long exhale, you rose. The floorboards creaked familiarly beneath your feet. You moved through the morning with practiced hands, adding kindling to the hearth, boiling water, laying out a crust of bread. The routines had returned slowly these past weeks, like songs half remembered. Now they were back fully, yet changed, sweeter in their simplicity. You stepped outside with your cup in hand and breathed in the air. It smelled of dew and firewood and something more, something that had no name but lived deep in the chest. Continuance. A rooster called out in the near distance, then a second. Then the first birds began their morning songs, their chirps and trills threading through the branches like ribbons of light. The village, still sleeping in places, hummed with that early silence that speaks of readiness. It would not be a special day, not marked on a calendar or etched into memory by any grand moment, but it would be, in a quieter way, a day worth remembering. Because today, you would rebuild the last part of the bridge, the one that crossed the narrow stream at the far end of the village, the one that had always carried children to the orchard, or lovers to the willow grove, or elders to their morning walks. It had fallen into disuse months ago. The wooden slats had rotted at the base, and moss had claimed the handrails. But yesterday, when the carpenter's daughter crossed it barefoot to gather watercress, it had given way beneath her. She was fine, only a scratch on her palm, but her laugh afterward had stirred something in everyone. It was time to mend it. And so the plan was made. By mid-morning, the sun was high and the village fully awake. You had gathered your tools, a small satchel of nails, and a bundle of dry boards salvaged from the back of the cooper's shed. Others were already making their way to the site. Tomas with his hammer, Marna with a pail of wash water, and even the priest, sleeves rolled, carrying a loaf of bread for the workers. The path to the stream wound through the lower edge of the fields, past rows of pea shoots now climbing their stakes, and wheat still low but green. You paused once, mid-journey, to pick a wildflower growing in the tall grass. A bright cornflower, blue as the morning sky. You tucked it behind your ear, where it sat snug against your hair. When you reached the bridge, you found the others already at work. The old boards had been cleared, the supports scrubbed and checked. The posts, though mossy, were solid. There was laughter, not loud, but constant, the kind that rises easily when hands are busy and the work is shared. You joined in naturally, passing tools, aligning planks, holding beams while others hammered. No one needed to be told what to do. The rhythm of the village guided you all. Children watched from the bank, skipping stones and playing games. Someone had brought a small clay pot of sweet cider, which passed from hand to hand as the sun climbed higher. At midday, you sat under a sycamore to rest. Your legs were sore, your hands dirty, but your chest felt light. Marna passed you a slice of bread thick with jam and a boiled egg. She had wrapped it in cloth, still warm. You thanked her with a smile, then passed half to a boy sitting nearby. He ate it in silence, eyes wide, cheeks smudged with dust. He had lost both parents in the sickness. The priest had taken him in. Today, he was here helping gather nails, proud and eager. He looked up at you once, mouth full, and gave the smallest nod. You nodded back. That was enough. By late afternoon, the bridge stood whole again. It wasn't beautiful. Not in the old way. The wood didn't match. One side sloped slightly more than the other. The railings were made from salvaged fence posts, but it was strong, and it stood. You were the first to walk across at the carpenter's insistence. The wood creaked under your feet but held. The stream gurgled beneath, playful and cool. On the far side, you turned and raised your arms in quiet triumph. A cheer went up, soft but sincere. Children followed, some with sticks like staffs, some barefoot, arms outstretched as if walking a tightrope. The bridge was more than a crossing. It was a sign that something had been broken, and now it was whole again. That evening, back at your cottage, the breeze carried a melody, someone singing a lullaby from a window down the lane. You didn't know the words, but it didn't matter. You opened your shutters wide, lit a candle, and sat by the glow. Tomorrow would be another quiet day. More gardens to tend, more tools to sharpen, perhaps a visit to the orchard. But tonight, you would rest in this feeling. The village had not simply survived, it had returned. You noticed now how the buildings leaned into each other, how the ivy was allowed to climb again, how the firewood was stacked not just for warmth, but in preparation for stories. The chapel bell had rung at sunset, one clear chime. Not for mourning, not for ceremony, just a note to mark the hour, a heartbeat in the stillness. And the people, your people, were all somewhere close, some behind shutters, some beneath blankets, some still outside tending their fires, but all here, living, and you too were here. You poured one final cup of tea, a blend of mint and linden flower, and wrapped yourself in the shawl that had seen you through each season. The sky was deepening into velvet. The stars blinked awake, unhurried. And in your chest, that old ache had softened into something new. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. You looked out the window one last time and whispered to the night, "We are still here." Then you turned down the wick on the candle, slipped beneath the blanket, and let the silence fold over you like a warm hand. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and the village slept, whole, mended, reborn.
The last light of day had long since faded beyond the western hills. What had once been a golden sky, streaked with orange and pale lavender, had softened into deep blue velvet stitched with early stars. Now the world beyond the castle walls was shadow and hush. Trees stood still, and the village below lay quiet, wrapped in that sleepy stillness that came only after the day's final chores had ended. Inside the castle, the air was cooler, not cold, but old, the kind of coolness that settles into thick stone after the sun has gone, winding through corridors and echoing gently in stairwells. The torches had been lit one by the steward's boy, each flame catching with a quiet pop, a soft fluttering of light that spread down every hallway and stairwell like golden breadcrumbs. The kitchens had gone quiet. The last pot had been scrubbed and set to dry. The bread ovens emptied of ash, their fires gently banked for morning. A lone scullery maid, arms powdered with flour, had passed you in the corridor, yawning into her sleeve as she made her way toward the servants' quarters tucked behind the storerooms. You waited until the final bell rang, the low, mellow toll of iron that echoed through the great hall and up into the towers. That was your signal, the beginning of your shift. You took your time, just as you always did. There was no need to rush. The castle didn't ask for speed. It asked for steadiness, dependability, the slow rhythm of someone who knew the halls better than anyone awake. You moved through the outer guard room with practiced hands, donning your cloak and boots, lifting your lantern from its hook by the hearth. It swayed gently as you held it aloft, its warm yellow light catching on the stone floor, illuminating the long sweep of the hallway ahead. You began your rounds. The corridor curved gently to the right, leading toward the chapel and the stairwell that wound up to the south battlement. Each step echoed softly, your boots worn quiet over years of walking the same path. You moved slowly, letting the castle's nighttime hush settle over you. A draught stirred from a narrow arrow, slit near the end of the passage, carrying with it the scent of night air and damp moss from the outer wall. You paused beside it for a moment, looking out. Below, the village slumbered in stillness. A few chimney tops still curled faint tendrils of smoke into the air, glowing faint orange in the moonlight. A dog barked once in the distance, one sharp call, then nothing. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl responded, low and musical. You knew the sounds. You knew them like others knew the hours of a clock. A small flicker of candlelight glowed in one cottage window. A mother nursing a child, perhaps, or someone reading a letter by the embers. You often wondered who stayed up with you. But tonight, the world seemed tucked in, settled, sleeping. You continued on. The chapel doors were closed, as always at this hour, but the torch sconces beside them still flickered with life. You passed your hand gently over the carved wood, an old habit of respect, one you had never outgrown. Inside, you imagined the still air, the scent of wax and old stone. A single candle always burned in the far corner, by the statue of St. Elia. It was said never to go out, not in storm or siege. You had never seen it extinguished. Your lantern cast golden ovals on the floor as you made your way down another corridor. The air was cooler here, where the stone walls grew thicker. You passed old tapestries hanging still in their alcoves, scenes of battle, of harvest, of kings long dead whose names had worn thin with the centuries. One tapestry had always been your favorite, a simple one, barely colored. It showed a woman placing a crown on a sleeping child's brow. No one could tell you the story behind it. The seamstress who had woven it had left no name. But every night You paused before it, just for a moment, and bowed your head. The torch beside it fluttered, responding to the motion of your cloak. You turned left down the long corridor that led to the old gatehouse. The great wooden doors had been sealed for the night. Crossbar laid in place, hinges tightened. But still, you checked them, just as you always did. Your hand moved to the iron latch, firm cold, undisturbed. You placed your ear to the wood just to listen. Beyond, there was only silence, the wind against the drawbridge, the faint creak of timber shifting under night air, the deep, still hum of a sleeping world. Satisfied, you stepped back and made a note of it in your little book. You carried it always in your side pocket, just a simple bound journal, the cover soft with wear. Each page held nothing more than tiny marks, dates, times, your quiet record of quiet nights. The walk to the lower hall was long, and you welcomed the space. The high arches above you echoed the faint drip of water from somewhere far off, a leaky pipe, or perhaps just the sound of the walls settling into themselves after another day. Your lantern threw your shadow long across the floor, distorting its shape in the uneven flicker. This part of the castle was always cooler. The air smelled faintly of stone and old iron. A bench stood near the corner where a stone basin once held water. It was dry now, but the grooves of it remained, worn deep from years of use. You sat for a moment, adjusting your cloak. Your shoulders relaxed. This was your rhythm. This was your night. Sometimes you saw the steward's cat here, an old, broad tomcat with a half-torn ear and a limp. He'd curl near the torchlight, watching you with golden eyes before disappearing into the dark. Tonight, he didn't appear. Perhaps he was already curled beside the hearth in the steward's office. You didn't blame him. You stood once more and moved on, boots soft against the stone. You checked the old pantry, doors shut, nothing amiss. The flag room, quiet, with folded standards wrapped neatly on wooden racks. The armory, still, the helmets lined in a row like sleepy sentinels. The castle wasn't silent, not truly, but it was a kind of quiet that welcomed thought, a quiet that invited breath, a quiet that made you feel needed, not for action, not for bravery, but for presence. And presence, you'd learned, could be its own kind of protection. You crossed the inner courtyard, your breath visible now in the colder air. The stars above were brilliant, sharp and clear in the black sky. You moved beneath them, like a shadow of the walls that held you. One with them, trusted, familiar. The night was only just beginning, and already the castle had settled into your rhythm. As you reached the stair that led to the battlements, your lantern swayed gently with your steps. The sound of your boots against the stone stairwell echoed in a way you found comforting, steady, spaced, familiar. A sound that belonged to you and the castle alone. At the top, the wind greeted you first. Cool and crisp, it tugged gently at your cloak, brushing your face with night air that smelled faintly of damp earth and distant firewood. You stepped onto the battlement walk, your lantern lighting the wall in long glowing curves. The countryside stretched out before you in every direction. Dark fields, silent woods, the river reflecting moonlight in soft silver. You paused there, one hand resting on the ancient stone ledge, and took a long, slow breath. The kind of breath that fills the chest and empties the mind. You stood still, listening, feeling. The castle behind you was calm, The village below was still, and the stars above, endless. This was your place, and the night was yours to keep. The battlement stones were smooth beneath your gloved hands, cool but not cold. They had been worn soft by centuries of watchmen before you, all pacing these very stones, standing in these very spots, gazing out into the dark. Each of them would have known the same wind brushing their cloaks, the same creak of wood and groan of metal from the gates below. You could almost hear their footsteps in yours, like echoes folded deep into the rock. The wind stirred again, gentle, steady. It smelled of pine and ash and wet leaves. Far below, the faintest wisps of chimney smoke still drifted into the air, curling into the moonlight before disappearing. You leaned your elbow against the ledge and gazed out. The village beyond the walls was utterly still now. No more lights, no movement between cottages. Even the stray dog you sometimes spotted darting down the alleys had disappeared for the night. All the shops and stalls were closed, barrels pulled under overhangs, crates covered in cloth. The thatched roofs gleamed faintly in the moonlight, outlined in silver where frost had just begun to gather. You listen to everything, to nothing, to the soft hush of night that wasn't silence, but the kind of quiet that holds sound gently in its arms. You heard the brush of the trees outside the far fields, the lapping of the river beyond the gate, the occasional chirp of a cricket determined to linger too long into the cold. And within the castle itself, sleep. You could feel it, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of rest. The servants' quarters, quiet now, creaking floorboards silenced by stillness, the rustle of sheets as people turned over in their beds. Some might be whispering stories to their children in the dark, some dreaming, some deep, unmoving in their slumber. Above, in the small, narrow tower rooms, the apprentices slept, scrolls rolled beside their beds, inkpots capped, and quills set aside. You imagined their dreams, full of grand plans and impossible hopes. One day they would wear robes and rings and carry staffs, but tonight they slept like children, the candlelight long since extinguished. The High Lord's chambers were dark, the great curtains drawn over leaded windows. Down the hall, the mistress of the household likely slept near the fire, with the soft glow of embers painting orange shapes on the walls. The guards' quarters, too, were quiet, their armor stored, their boots off. You'd seen them hours earlier, yawning and passing bowls of stew between them in the mess, speaking in low voices of routine things. Mud on the roads, the harvest festival. A new pair of gloves someone had bartered from the tanner. Now, even they had gone still. All but you. You and the castle. You moved slowly along the battlements, letting your lantern swing lightly in your hand. Its soft light flickered in the curved recesses of the walkway, catching on bits of moss growing between stones. Your footsteps were spaced out and steady, the sound of your boots a familiar tap-tap on the path. You paused again to look out beyond the wall. A cloud passed in front of the moon, dimming the light for a moment, turning the entire world blue and silver. The stars above blinked steadily, bright against the velvet sky. You tilted your head back and watched them, the same stars that had watched over this castle since its foundation stone had been laid, the same stars that had shone down over battles and feasts, snowfalls and weddings, years of noise and joy and fear and laughter, and now they shone down over you, quiet as old songs. You closed your eyes for a moment, just breathing, letting the wind wrap gently around your cloak, letting the night touch your face and whisper through your hair. Then, slowly, you turned to continue your walk. You made your way down the east steps, careful not to let the lantern bounce too much as you descended. The stairs here were old, some slightly bowed from age, and your feet knew each one. You didn't need to count them anymore. At the bottom, you passed through a small archway and into the corridor that led toward the stables. This hall always smelled faintly of hay and wool, of saddle leather and sweet oats. You welcomed the scent, familiar and steady. The stables were quiet, but not silent. Horses don't sleep the way people do. They breathe deeply. They shift their weight. They flick their ears at the softest sound. You stepped softly, lowering your lantern as you approached the stable door. It creaked slightly when you opened it, just a little, and the horses stirred, but only faintly. One lifted its head from the straw, blinked at you slowly, then resumed its dozing. Another let out a deep, rumbling sigh through its nostrils, hooves shuffling in place. You walked the aisle between the stalls, patting a neck here, brushing straw from a mane there. They knew you, trusted you. You murmured something quiet and wordless to one of them, and he responded by nudging your shoulder gently before settling down again. You could hear the rustle of hay, the slow flick of tails, the occasional soft whinny from deeper inside. The lantern light cast long, soft shadows on the beams. You stood there for a moment, letting the warmth and scent of the stable wash over you. Then, with another slow breath, you turned and stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind you. You made your way toward the side tower. It was quietest there. The hallways grew narrower, the windows fewer. The torches here had dimmed lower, their flames swaying gently in the still air. You passed by a carved alcove where a single statue stood, an old knight in half-armor, a sword across his knees. No name was carved beneath him, just a single line in old script, steady as stone. You always paused here, just a second, not for ritual, but for rhythm. You touched the hilt of your dagger, still sheathed as it had been all night, and continued walking. As you turned the next corner, you heard the familiar creak of the floorboard near the steward's chamber. It always groaned in the same way, even under your light step. The castle remembered every weight, every sound, every traveler. You walked slower now, letting the moments stretch, letting your mind unfurl like parchment. There was no danger tonight. You could feel it in your bones, in your breath. The castle had settled into true rest. It was in the way the doors hung in their frames, the way the windows didn't rattle, the way the flames swayed without flicker. You knew the difference. Tonight was peace, and you were its witness. You reached the end of the hall and opened a narrow wooden door that led into the stairwell. A short climb, a familiar room. You didn't need to speak. The fire was already lit. The door opened with a quiet wooden groan, old hinges long since worn smooth by age and use. You stepped through into the fire-warmed chamber, the small watchroom at the edge of the battlements. It was simple, sparse, the way it had always been. Just a low hearth with glowing embers, a pair of wooden chairs, and a small, round table pushed near the wall. There was a narrow slit of a window facing east, just wide enough to let in a sliver of starlight, and a hook by the door where you hung your lantern now, its glow replaced by the steadier comfort of the coals. You stretched your arms quietly and removed your gloves, laying them gently beside the fire. The stone walls radiated the faintest warmth, held from the afternoon sun and the firelight that flickered low, low in the hearth. On the table sat a covered pot, its contents still warm, just barely. You opened the lid to reveal a small amount of mulled cider, still fragrant with spices. You poured a measure into a clay cup and cradled it in your hands as you sat down slowly, letting your weight ease into the creaking wood of the chair. The heat of the drink spread into your fingers and then up your arms. You took a slow sip, sweet with notes of clove and orange and something almost floral. You'd never asked what the cook added to the cider, but you suspected it was something only she knew. A secret meant for the nighttime, meant for watchers. You sat in silence, feeling the weight of your shift in the soft ache of your shoulders and the slow calming of your heartbeat. There was a cat in the room. You'd nearly forgotten. He lay curled on a small cushion near the fire, his body coiled tight, his paws tucked neatly beneath him. His fur was a patchy blend of soot grey and creamy white, and one of his ears had a little notch, like a quill tip. He opened one golden eye, looked at you without interest, and returned to sleep. You smiled. He was always here. No one had named him, at least not that you knew. He was simply the cat in the watchroom, as steady and quiet as the old stones. Some said he'd belonged to a guard long gone. Others whispered that he'd been here longer than anyone, that perhaps the castle had created him somehow, woven him from dust and wood smoke. You didn't mind the mystery. He was good company even when silent. You leaned back in your chair and listened. The wind at this level moved differently, less like a breeze, more like a breath drawn slow across the top of the walls. It made a low, constant sound, more felt than heard, a soft hush that stretched across the night, wrapping the castle like a shawl. You could hear the fire shifting too, one coal falling against another, the hiss of wood too old to flame but too proud to fade. The cat's breathing was a slow rhythm, almost in time with yours. You sat like that for some time, drinking slowly, thinking very little, just breathing, letting the warmth reach deeper, letting the stillness settle fully into your limbs, like dust into the corners of a forgotten room. Eventually, you stood, not because you wanted to move, but because it was time. The walk was not finished yet, and the night still belonged to you. You returned your cup to the table, placed a single log on the hearth to keep the fire company, and adjusted your cloak. The cat blinked once as you passed, then closed his eyes again, unbothered. The door creaked once more as you stepped out onto the wall walk, the upper passage that ringed the outer wall. This was your favorite part of the shift. Up here, the view stretched far in every direction. Below, you lay the outer courtyard, quiet and still. The garden plots sat tucked in for the night, with their low stone borders and raked paths, winding between rows of winter herbs. Beyond the castle walls, the land sloped down into fields and forest. Even in darkness, you could make out the outlines of hedgerows, the curve of the river, and the clustered roofs of the sleeping village. The stars were clearer now, brighter. The moon had begun to rise higher into the sky, no longer hidden behind clouds. It cast silver across the stones, painting the walls in soft grey shadows that stretched and swayed with the movements of the wind. You walked slowly. There was no rush. There was never a rush. Each step was deliberate, the soft sound of your boots against the ancient walkway, a quiet drumbeat against the night's lullaby. The hem of your cloak brushed against the stone. Your breath came out in a slow, visible mist. The cold kissed your cheeks, not cruelly, but with the firm, clean touch of winter's edge. A soft hoot called from the woods beyond. You paused beside a crenellated opening in the wall and looked out. A white owl flew low over the fields, its wings wide and silent. It passed like a ghost through the trees, dipping once before vanishing into shadow. You watched the empty air where it had been, your breath held for just a second longer than necessary. Then you moved on. There were 6 watch points along this stretch of the wall, little alcoves with benches built into the stone, narrow slits for seeing far, and hooks for lanterns long since rusted. You stopped at the 3rd one, just as you always did. This one overlooked the river and the bridge. The water moved slowly in the moonlight, glittering where ice had not yet gathered. A light mist curled from the surface, rising into the cold air like something magical, breathing. There were stories told about the river, that it was fed by enchanted springs deep in the forest, that it listened, that it remembered. You had stood here so many nights that you almost believed it. Your hand rested gently on the worn edge of the stone. You traced the grooves in the surface, worn by generations of night watchers just like you, all of them with tired eyes and slow hearts and steady hands, all of them walking the same path, listening to the same night. And now, you were one of them. You stayed there for a long while, long enough for the moon to climb higher, for the frost to thicken on the distant roof tiles, for the owl to return, gliding overhead, heading back toward the forest. Eventually, you exhaled slowly and turned back. There were more stones to walk, more quiet to tend, but you felt no burden, only the rhythm of your duty, like a heartbeat in stone. The castle was resting, and you were its breath. The steps down from the wall walk were narrow, worn soft by centuries of boots and cloaks and sleepless hours. The stone was cool to the touch beneath your hand, and the railing, an old beam, polished smooth by time, had just a trace of warmth left in it from the sun it had once held. Your legs moved slowly, not from weariness, but because the quiet asked for it. You passed through a low archway, the lintel carved with a faded sigil of the first stonemasons who had laid this keep. Their mark, long forgotten in meaning, had become part of the castle's skin, just another symbol among the hundreds woven through its bones. The interior passage was dim, lit only by a pair of torches that burned low in their brackets. They cast a golden light that trembled gently across the stone, making the shadows stretch like old cloaks behind you. The corridor led down a short incline, into a rounded chamber where the ceiling dropped just enough to make the space feel close, but not tight. It was one of the smallest rooms in the castle, one often overlooked and left off the patrol maps altogether. You'd found it by accident years ago, after a winter storm had driven you in through a side door to escape the ice. The room had waited there, with no lock and no plaque, just a narrow fire grate, a crooked stool, and a bench pressed up against the wall beneath a single arched window. Now it was yours, not in title or ownership, but in the quiet way a place becomes part of your body over time. It was where you paused, always at this hour, for warmth, for breath, for something like stillness. The fire had been lit earlier in the evening, and though it had burned low by now, the stones around it still held heat. You knelt and placed a fresh log gently onto the grate, nudging it into the coals until they caught with a soft crackle and flickered into life. The scent of wood smoke slowly lifted into the air, clean and ancient, and the warmth followed close behind, stretching across the small room in waves. You placed your gloves on the bench and set your lantern on the windowsill. The glass was fogged slightly from the temperature shift, and beyond it, you could just make out the courtyard stones, now dusted in frost. The moon cast long shadows through the narrow window, illuminating the tips of the wooden beams and the carved edge of the door frame. You sat down on the bench slowly. The cushion was thin, but familiar. The kind of comfort that didn't come from softness, but from time. You leaned your head back against the wall and closed your eyes for a moment, just to listen. Silence. The castle was breathing. You could feel it in the walls. Not literally, of course, but in the way the fire hummed low, the wind found its way gently through cracks. The stone shifted like an old man stretching in his sleep. No voices, no bells, no horns. Not tonight. Only the small sounds. Your favorite ones. You reached into your coat pocket and drew out your journal. Not the logbook, but the small, leather-covered notebook you kept for yourself. No one had ever asked to see it, and you doubted anyone even knew it existed. You flipped it open to a blank page and drew your pencil slowly across it. Nothing urgent. No great poem or revelation. Just a few words. Midnight. Frost on the steps. The owl flew twice tonight. The fire still speaks. You didn't know why you wrote what you did, only that it helped keep the world steady. You closed the book and tucked it away again. Beside the hearth, a kettle rested, emptied now, but still warm to the touch. Someone must have placed it there for you earlier, as they sometimes did. The castle's kindness often came in small, quiet acts like that. Not grand gestures, but gestures nonetheless. You stood again, letting your fingers run along the edge of the mantel. Above it hung a small iron key on a chain. You had never known what it opened. It had simply always been there. You'd stopped wondering after a while. Sometimes things in this castle didn't need to be explained to be real. They just needed to be there. You paced the room slowly, the firelight flickering across the uneven stone. You thought, for a moment, of the apprentices above, still dreaming, likely, of the servants tucked under quilts, the children bundled in sleeping nooks beside their parents, of the older guards snoring in bunks, of the pages resting their ink-stained hands under pillows, of the High Lord, who, you were certain, no longer dreamed at all, and of the cat in the watchroom, probably now curled even deeper into his cushion, tail wrapped tight like a ribbon. And you, down here, the watcher, the listener, the quiet, you let your eyes drift closed again, not in sleep, not yet, but in the kind of peace that doesn't need eyes, the kind that sinks into your chest like music with no notes. Outside, the wind shifted. A tree branch scratched softly against the outer stones, no louder than a sigh. You listened to the rhythm of the fire, the heartbeat of coals shifting, cracking gently beneath the weight of flame. You could have stayed there forever, but not quite yet. You reached for your gloves again, slow and deliberate, one finger at a time. You stood and reached for your lantern, still casting a weak light from the sill. The final stretch of the watch lay ahead. You stepped back into the hallway, and as the door clicked shut behind you, you felt it. The castle turned in its sleep. The corridor ahead welcomed you like an old friend. It held your footsteps lightly, without echo or surprise, as if it too knew the shift was nearly complete. The stones had cooled now, and the air held that faint, crisp hush that only appeared just before dawn, the breath the night holds before it lets go. Your lantern glowed steady in your hand, no longer a beacon, just a companion. You passed under a rounded archway carved with trailing vines and stars. Above it, a small window opened to the night sky, and through it you saw the stars beginning to fade, just a little. The faintest tint of grey-blue had begun to bloom at the edge of the eastern horizon. Not enough to name it morning, not yet, but it was coming. You made your way through the long hallway that circled the central tower. This passage was your last sweep. You took it slow, letting each step settle, letting the night walk itself through you. To your right, an open alcove held a pair of worn stone benches, a forgotten shield resting beneath one. The shield had long since been retired, its sigil faded, its surface dented from some long-past battle. But it still stood, a quiet reminder that not all service ended with fanfare. Some just became part of the wall, like you. You passed it, giving it the smallest of nods. The torchlight flickered gently. The castle stirred again. Soft creaks, faint groans, the shifting of beams in response to the deep breath of the approaching morning. At the far end of the hallway, you turned and stepped out into the south-facing courtyard. The cold met you first. It had deepened since the start of your shift, settling into the grass and the stone path like a second skin. Frost glittered across the flagstones, catching your lantern's light and scattering it into little stars beneath your boots. You walked slowly. This part was never rushed. The sky above had changed. The stars had softened, their sharp edges dulled by the coming light. The moon hung lower now, its silver face turning west, satisfied with its watch. A pale band of morning stretched across the sky's lowest edge, the color of candle wax and cloud milk. You followed the path through the courtyard's heart, past a row of bare-limbed trees, their branches like ink lines drawn across the sky. The castle windows remained dark, but you imagined people stirring gently in their beds, a child shifting under wool blankets, a servant rolling over to check the hour, a baker, perhaps, already reaching for a cloak and shoes. And here you were, moving with purpose, but no urgency, your task nearly done. You approached the small gatehouse chamber where the changing of the watch always began and ended. A low wooden bench rested beside the outer door. A single lantern hung on a hook, swaying slightly in the wind. Inside the guard room, the fire had been kindled anew, and the scent of pine resin rose into the air. One of the younger guards sat at the edge of a small table, rubbing his eyes. His cloak was half folded beside him, and a half-eaten oat biscuit rested on a wooden plate. He looked up and nodded at you, with the familiar, sleep-heavy gaze of someone still returning to the world. "Anything tonight?" he asked, voice low. You shook your head gently. All quiet, you replied. He exhaled through his nose. Relief, gratitude, routine. Then he stood, pulled on his cloak, and reached for his own lantern, its light still dim and flickering. You passed each other in the doorway. A quiet nod, a changing of the rhythm. No fanfare, just the way things had always been. You stepped back into the guardroom, placing your lantern onto its hook for the final time. The clasp closed with a soft click, and the familiar clink of iron on stone. Your hands moved without thought now, unfastening your cloak, brushing down your sleeves, loosening the tightness from your shoulders. The fire crackled behind you. You stretched slowly, your back arching slightly, your breath coming longer now, fuller. This was the end of your night. You crossed the room and opened the door to the stairwell that led to the watchman's loft, a small space above the main keep, tucked under the eaves, far from the bustle of the waking day. The steps curved up gently, and you took them one at a time, the wood groaning beneath your feet in familiar tones. At the top was the little chamber, your chamber. The door opened without resistance, and the room inside greeted you like an old friend. The cot was modest but warm, the mattress slightly sunken, the wool blanket folded neatly at the end. A pitcher of water stood on the table. The window slit above the bed let in the first traces of grey morning, just enough to paint the walls in gentle light. You sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off your boots one at a time. Your feet sighed in their freedom. You set them aside and reached for the wool blanket, drawing it slowly up around your shoulders. And then you lay down. Silence. The cot held you with the ease of something long familiar. The mattress shifted beneath you, accepting your weight like a story accepts a final word. Outside, the wind still moved through the upper towers, but now it carried the breath of morning, the first bird call, the distant rattle of a stable door, the low crack of someone splitting kindling far below. But those things were not yours to tend. Not now. Your breath slowed. Your eyes fluttered once, twice. Your mind began to drift. Soft thoughts without edges, like the final pages of a book you've read too many times to count. You imagined the castle's walls wrapped around you, not with weight, but with stillness, with memory, with the quiet honor of having kept watch, as hundreds had done before you. You imagined the fire still burning low in the small chamber near the battlements. You imagined the cat still curled on his cushion, the horses shifting in their stalls, the pages still dreaming in their beds, and above them all, the sky turning toward day. But before it arrived, there was this moment, yours. You exhaled, long, even, still. The castle would wake soon. The bells would ring, the gates would open, the voices would rise again. But not yet, not for a while. Now, there was only the warmth of the blanket, the memory of the quiet halls, and the knowledge that for one more night, you had kept the silence. Safe. Silence for 4 to 6 seconds. And so, you rest. The castle sleeps, and so do you.
The sun had begun its slow descent beyond the rolling hills, casting long golden fingers across the soft, furrowed fields of Elderberry Hollow. A hush had settled over the land, not the silence of absence, but the calm of completion. Another day had passed, gentle and unhurried. and the village, nestled between two wooded ridges, was preparing for nightfall. A soft wind drifted through the narrow dirt lanes of the village, rustling the branches of the apple trees and carrying with it the faintest scent of hay, wood smoke, and warm bread. The air had cooled, brushing the cheeks of any who wandered outdoors with a touch of the evening stillness. A blackbird sang its final song from the roof of the chapel, then fell quiet, as if bowing to the night. At the heart of the village stood the old stone well, its worn rims smooth from generations of hands. A girl, perhaps 12, lowered her wooden pail with practiced ease, the rope groaning slightly as it turned over the worn pulley. She hummed a lullaby under her breath, the same tune her mother sang as she tucked the family in at night. With the pail full, she turned homeward, feet crunching softly over the packed earth path as a pair of chickens darted across her path, returning to their coop before the light disappeared. The cottages of Elderberry Hollow were modest, yet endearing in their time-worn charm. Built of timber and stone, their thatched roofs glowed with the amber light of the setting sun. Moss grew thick between the cobbles, and ivy curled up the sides of walls like nature's own embroidery. Windows were small, panes of oiled parchment letting through only a softened version of the outside world. From inside one home, the silhouette of a woman moved slowly about, lighting a rushlight and adjusting a clay pot over the hearth. The village blacksmith, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Halric, stood just outside his forge. He wiped the soot from his brow with a thick cloth, surveying the tools hanging on the wall. The forge had gone cold now. No more hammering tonight, only the faint warmth that lingered in the embers. He exhaled through his nose, satisfied, and hung up his apron. As he turned toward his cottage, his youngest daughter ran to greet him, barefoot and grinning, her cheeks smudged with flour from helping her mother in the kitchen. She reached up and he lifted her easily into his arms. The day's labor was behind him. All that remained now was warmth, family, and the peaceful hush of twilight. Down by the edge of the village, a row of goats clattered up a wooden ramp into their shelter, nudged along by a boy with a crooked smile and a stick too large for his size. He whistled as he worked, a simple meandering tune. Above him, smoke curled lazily from a chimney, dark against the fading pastel sky. A woman leaned from her doorway, calling softly to her son that supper was ready. The boy tipped his head and waved, making one last round to count the goats before jogging up the lane, the stick thumping rhythmically against the dirt. As the sun touched the horizon, the sky turned a dusky lavender, streaked with delicate threads of coral and rose. A soft mist began to settle in the low places, near the brook, between hedges, along the meadow's edge. The water in the village stream whispered over smooth stones, its quiet song unchanged for centuries. Somewhere far off, a cow lowed in the distance, followed by the metallic clink of a pail. The world was winding down. Near the chapel, the elderly Father Alwyn rang the small iron bell, not to summon, but to signal the day's end. He did so each evening, though most villagers no longer came for evening prayers. It didn't matter. The bell's tone was as much a part of Elderberry Hollow as the cobbled paths and the scent of stew on a winter night. It echoed gently through the lanes, a reminder of rhythm, of time, of comfort. One need not attend to hear its blessing. Inside the bakery, thick wooden doors had been latched for the night, but warmth still radiated from within. Breads baked earlier in the day lay cooling on slatted shelves, the crust golden and cracked just right. A single candle burned beside the hearth, where the baker's wife sat knitting, her fingers moving in time with the ticking of the old hourglass beside her. Tomorrow would bring another batch of flour, another long knead, another rising undercloth, but not yet. Tonight was for rest. Past the last row of cottages, where the village gave way to fields and low stone walls, an old shepherd sat beneath a tree, his back against the bark, his cloak wrapped tightly around his shoulders. His dog lay curled at his feet, head tucked beneath a paw. The sheep had already huddled together, still and safe in their pen. He watched the sky darken, blinking slowly, listening to the owls wake up in the trees above. There was a comfort in this, knowing each night came just as it had before, bringing with it quiet, familiar things. In the center of the village square, an oil lamp was lit atop a carved post. It flickered bravely against the wind, its flame dancing behind a small glass pane. One by one, the other lamps followed, sending pools of warm light into the creeping shadows. A few villagers remained outside, exchanging soft words as they returned from errands or shared bits of news. But even these voices were gentle, as if the night asked not for silence, but softness. In one home, a young couple tucked their toddler into a cradle near the fire. The baby yawned and grumbled, protesting sleep in the way all babies do, but soon quieted, under the weight of a woolen blanket and the slow rhythm of a lullaby, sung just under breath. The mother traced a pattern over the cradle's edge, a habit born of love and repetition, while the father stirred a small pot of oats for tomorrow's breakfast, its scent rising in soft steam. Not far from them, an elderly woman sat in a rocking chair by the shuttered window, holding a spindle in one hand and wool in the other. Her motions were slow, meditative. The creak of the chair and the soft twist of the yarn were the only sounds in the room. She hummed as she worked, a tune older than she was, one passed to her from her grandmother's lips in that very same cottage. The fire crackled quietly in the hearth, its light casting gentle shadows across the stone walls. Overhead, stars began to prick through the navy sky, first one, then a handful, then 100. The moon, round and soft, hovered just above the trees, casting pale light across the thatched rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a barn owl let out a single mellow call. The wind shifted slightly, drawing curtains in and out of windows like breath. As darkness deepened, homes glowed gently from within, lanterns and candles illuminating hearths and corners, straw beds and wooden chests. Doors were latched not out of fear, but for comfort. Windows shuttered not to keep things out, but to keep the warmth in. The world had grown small, a single village wrapped in quiet. The forests beyond were hushed, the hills slumbering beneath starlight. No carriages passed, no travelers approached, just Elderberry Hollow, as it had been for generations, easing into its evening with care. And you, dear listener, are here now too. You walk through the lanes, unseen but welcome. You pass each home, feeling the comfort of warm light through parchment windows. You step lightly over cobblestones, hear the faintest murmur of laughter, the rustle of straw, the creak of timber as homes settle into silence. Perhaps you pause beside the well. The bucket rests beside it now, its rope coiled neatly on the stone. A toad chirps softly from the shadows, and the air carries the smell of chamomile, of baked earth, of worn wood. There is no rush, no duties await, no voices call. You are a guest of the village, and tonight all it asks of you is to rest, to breathe, to be still beneath its blanket of stars. Let the wind carry you now toward rest. Let the soft light fade around you. Let the quiet sounds of Elderberry Hollow settle gently in your thoughts. The day is done. The night has come. And the village, like you, is ready for sleep. The doors of Elderberry Hollow's cottages closed gently as twilight deepened into night. Outside, the wind continued its slow drift over the rooftops, rustling the thatch like a lullaby played just for the village. Inside, the world became smaller, warmer, more fragrant with wood smoke, stew, and the faint sweetness of drying herbs. Let us step quietly into one such home, the cottage of the Thatcher family near the edge of the village. The door creaks gently on its hinges as it opens inward, revealing a single open room that serves as kitchen, sitting room, and sleeping quarters all in one. The floor is packed earth, swept smooth and scattered with woven rushes. The walls are timber and daub, thick with centuries of smoke and comfort. A wide stone hearth dominates one end of the room, where the fire burns low now, banked for the night but still offering a gentle, radiant warmth. Above the hearth hangs a blackened iron pot, nestled among low flames, holding the remnants of the evening supper, a hearty pottage of barley, leeks, and root vegetables. The scent lingers in the air, mingled with the fragrance of wild thyme and chamomile that hang in bunches from the ceiling beams, drying slowly in the heat from the fire. In one corner, a stack of round, coarse loaves rests beneath a clean linen cloth, ready for tomorrow's meals. A crock of butter sits nearby, nestled in a bed of cool straw. The family moves quietly through their bedtime rituals. The eldest daughter, in her early teens, finishes sweeping the rushes by the door, gathering the dust and stray twigs from the day into a small wicker pan. Her little brother, barely more than 5, plays with a carved wooden ox near the hearth, murmuring a made-up story about fields and dragons. The father checks the shutters, making sure each one is latched and snug against the cooling night air. The wooden pegs that hold them closed are smooth from years of use, fitted perfectly into their carved grooves. On a shelf beside the hearth sits a shallow clay basin. The mother pours warm water into it, dipping a rough linen cloth and gently wiping her youngest child's face and hands. The baby gurgles softly, lulled by the familiar touch and the flickering firelight. One by one, each family member washes the dust of the day from their hands and feet, sighing softly as they do. The water, now darkened with soot and soil, is carried outside and poured onto the garden plot where herbs and leeks grow in neat rows. Back inside, the father lifts a heavy woolen curtain that divides the main room from a small alcove, barely large enough to stand in, where he and his wife sleep. The bed is made from a wooden frame with ropes stretched tightly across, supporting a mattress stuffed with straw and sheep's wool. Above the bed hangs a small woven cross, a symbol of blessing and protection. A single beeswax candle burns on a wooden shelf, casting gentle light on the blankets below. Coarse, well mended, but warm. The children's bedding is simpler. Piles of straw covered in woolen wraps and linen sheets, spread neatly along the wall opposite the hearth. Each blanket is a little different. One dyed with madder root, giving it a rosy hue. another of faded blue, colored with woad, and one entirely undyed, soft and sheep gray. They settle in together, giggling softly, as the eldest hushes them with exaggerated seriousness. She shares a story, one passed from her grandmother, about a fox who wore boots and outwitted a knight. Her voice hushed but full of drama. Overhead, the beams of the cottage stretch dark and solid, some bent slightly with age. Between them, bundles of lavender and rosemary hang beside drying onions and strings of mushrooms. A squirrel's tail hangs too. A lucky charm said to keep away bad dreams. Tucked beside one beam, an old bird's nest rests undisturbed, the family long since flown, but the cottage owner's too sentimental to remove it. A cat pads softly across the room, tail held high. She pauses near the hearth, circles twice, and curls into a tight ball on a small fur mat. Her slow, steady purring rises and falls like waves on a pond. No one pays her much mind. She's always there, a creature of habit, never far from warmth or crumbs. The mother lowers the candle's wick, and the light dims slightly. She sits beside the hearth now, her hands busy with mending. A sock worn thin at the heel, a shirt with a frayed cuff. Her needle moves smoothly through the fabric, guided more by memory than sight. Every so often, she pauses to listen, to the crackle of the fire, to the breathing of her children, to the creak of the wooden roof settling above her. A gust of wind whistles down the chimney, making the fire flutter and the shadows dance across the walls. Outside, a light rain begins to fall, tapping gently against the thatched roof and the wooden shutters. It's a soothing sound, familiar and soft, like the voice of the village itself singing the world to sleep. In the alcove, the father lies down, his back creaking slightly as he stretches out beneath the covers. He sighs, the kind of deep, quiet sigh that only comes at the end of a long, well-spent day. His wife joins him moments later, blowing gently on the candle before slipping beneath the blankets. The room dims further, the fire the only light now, casting a low, amber glow. From another cottage nearby, a faint melody drifts through the wall. Someone playing a flute, slow and wandering, like a lullaby for the whole village. It's not precise or practiced, but it is beautiful in its imperfection. The notes carry across rooftops and rain, a gentle echo of comfort and companionship. In a different home, a widow sits alone, her dog curled at her feet. She sips a mug of warm milk steeped with sage, staring quietly into the fire. A carved wooden comb rests beside her, its teeth smoothed by decades of use. She runs it through her hair with long, steady strokes, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. On the wall, a small tapestry hangs, faded but treasured, woven by her mother when she was still a child. It shows the same cottage, the same hearth, the same tree that still stands outside the door. She smiles as she looks at it, then leans back, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. The dog shifts in its sleep, sighing, and the fire pops quietly in reply. Elsewhere, a young couple share a single bed, newlywed, and still whispering secrets into each other's ears. Their hands rest intertwined atop the blanket, their eyes not quite closed. They speak of the future, of planting garlic next week, of building a bigger coop for the hens, of the faint hope for a child by spring. Their laughter is low, contented, and soon fades into silence. Every home in Elderberry Hollow has its own rhythm, its own little story, yet all share the same ritual now. The end of the day, the warmth of fire, the softness of wool, the hush of candlelight, Sleep does not come all at once, but in slow ripples, like a pebble dropped in a still pond, touching each life, each room, each breath. Outside, the rain grows steadier, and the thatch holds firm. The scent of wet grass and wood smoke curls under the eaves, slipping into every crevice. Tiny rivulets run down the grooves of stone walls, disappearing into the thirsty earth below. Inside, the fire begins to fade. Red coals glow faintly, barely illuminating the corners of the room. The family sleeps now, the children in their nests of wool and straw, the parents behind the curtain, the cat by the fire. Even the spinning wheel rests, still as stone, its last thread trailing from the spindle like a sigh. All is still. And somewhere beneath the covers, behind closed eyes and calm faces, dreams begin to form of spring meadows, of bread fresh from the oven, of festivals and music and sunlit streams. Dreams woven from the threads of daily life, simple, sturdy, and full of quiet joy. Here in these cottages of wood and woven wool, the world is at rest. The day is gone. The fire is low, and you too are safe and warm beneath a roof built with love, wrapped in the silence of night. Let yourself drift now as the wind moves past the shutters and the rain sings against the roof. Let your thoughts grow softer, slower, lighter, like wool carted into clouds. There is nothing left to do, nothing to worry about. You are home in this quiet place, in this gentle time. Sleep now. The morning in Elderberry Hollow always begins with the softest of sounds. The cooing of doves in the rafters of the granary, the first clink of a pail against the stone lip of the well, the scrape of a wooden door easing open as the village slowly wakes. But you're not there for the morning. You've arrived in memory, in story, a peaceful glide through the village's daily life, not as it is this moment, but as it always is, gently turning with the seasons. Life here moves slowly. It is deliberate, not dull, like a wheel that's been greased just enough to turn smoothly, steadily, without rush or drag. No clock ticks loudly in this village. Time is kept by the sun and the shadows, by the rooster's call and the angle of smoke drifting through the air. In Elderberry Hollow, most things are made by hand. The tools used to mend, to shape, to build, they carry the imprint of generations. The village carpenter, Master Adric, keeps his chisels wrapped in wool, lined up with care on a wooden rack he built in his youth. He carves new handles for old brooms, mends door hinges, and, when there's time, fashions small toys for the children, spinning tops, wooden sheep, and little carts with uneven wheels that still delight. The potter, a quiet man named Simon, lives by the river's edge, where clay is easy to find, and the wheel sits near a window for light. His hands are always stained with earth, even after washing. His cups and bowls are never perfect, a wobble here, a lean there, but they are well loved. No two pieces are alike, yet they all belong to the same family, scattered through every home, clinking softly at mealtime. There's a communal feel to everything in Elderberry Hollow. The baker's oven is large enough to hold several families' loaves at once. Each morning, before dawn, villagers bring their dough in proofing baskets, carefully marked with symbols so they'll know which is theirs. And each afternoon, they collect the golden rounded loaves, sometimes with a bit of gossip, sometimes with a quiet nod of thanks. Children help where they can, though it's often more play than work. They chase chickens in circles, bring in firewood, half of it dropped along the way, and fill buckets at the well while splashing half the water onto their tunics. They learn early how to knead dough, spin wool, patch holes. Not perfectly, but lovingly. Animals are part of the rhythm too, not distant, but familiar, almost neighbors. Cows low as they're milked each morning, their breath steaming in the cool air. Goats climb wherever they can, always mischievous. Chickens patrol the village paths like feathery sentries, and dogs doze under carts, blinking lazily at passers-by. At the edge of the woods, hives hum with bees, the beekeepers moving slowly and speaking softly, as if not to disturb the very air. Evenings, as you've seen, are quiet, but the daylight brings small gatherings. A patch of grass near the well often becomes a place of shared rest, where elders sit with baskets of mending or bundles of herbs, their hands busy, their voices low. They share remedies and riddles, folk tales and complaints about the weather. There is always weather to discuss. On certain days, a peddler arrives, not often, but often enough that his visits feel like miniature festivals. He brings ribbon and soap, copper pins and dyed thread, sometimes a new song or story from another village. The children follow him in a cluster, eyes wide, feet muddy. He stays the night in the inn, sharing a room with the road dust and the scent of faraway things. The village priest, Father Alwyn, tends not only to souls but also to chickens, fruit trees, and a very temperamental goose named Mildred. His chapel garden is orderly and overflowing. Leeks, parsnips, mint, wormwood, and roses, all growing in tidy rows. When not tending to his small congregation, he writes with great care in the parish ledger, his script neat and curling, his thoughts often wandering into the margins, with small notes about births, weather, or dreams. Sometimes when a new child is born, the village celebrates not with ceremony but with food. A shared pot of stew left on the doorstep, a round of cheese, a cake sweetened with honey. Names are whispered as blessings, and neighbors drop by with offerings and advice, some helpful, some simply traditional. The baby is swaddled in soft wool, passed gently from lap to lap like a candle. Love, in elderberry hollow, is rarely loud. It's the extra egg left in a neighbor's basket, the borrowed knife returned sharpened, the quiet presence at someone's side after loss, not to fix it, but simply to be there. It's woven into the threads of daily kindness, unnoticed unless you stop and look. Festivals are rare, but treasured. The harvest feast is the grandest, with tables set up in the square, piled high with roasted root vegetables, meat pies, and apples stewed in cinnamon. Music rings out, not professional, but joyful. A lute, a pipe, and a timbre played by the blacksmith's eldest son. People dance in simple steps, laughter rising like the smoke from evening fires. There is a village storyteller, of course. There always is. Hers is not a title, but a role that fits like an old cloak. Her name is Marin, and her voice carries the lilt of mountains far away. She gathers the children by the fire at the inn some evenings and speaks in slow rhythms, painting worlds with words. The stories are of clever foxes, enchanted meadows, and knights who forget to be brave or remember just in time. But her favorite stories are the old ones, the ones rooted right in Elderberry Hollow, where names are familiar and ghosts are kind. Not every day is light and laughter. Sometimes crops fail, Sometimes a roof leaks, or an ankle turns, or a winter comes too early. But the village has learned how to carry one another. There is a kind of magic in that, not the kind with wands or spells, but the deeper sort, the kind that grows slowly and blooms quietly. It's in the way firewood appears at your door before you ask, in the way the healer remembers which child has nightmares, in the way everyone knows the tune to the same lullaby, even if they learned it from different mothers. The tools of life are simple here. Mortars and pestles, spindles and shears, shovels with worn handles, baskets woven from willow branches. They are passed down like stories, like names, like recipes. Nothing is wasted. Old tunics become quilt patches. Cracked pots hold seeds. Even broken chairs find new purpose as kindling for the hearth. Seasons shift slowly, and life with them. In spring, the air smells of wet soil and green things. In summer, dust and sweet hay. Autumn brings smoke and cider, winter a hush of snow and wool. Each season carries its own sounds too. The splash of muddy boots, the hum of bees, the crunch of frost, the song of distant geese. Time in Elderberry Hollow doesn't pass in hours, but in moments. The sound of bread crust cracking as it cools, the feel of warm water over cold hands, the hush of a shared silence, the flicker of candlelight just before it's snuffed out for the night. And through it all, there is sleep, gentle, earned, sacred. After days filled with rhythm and reason, laughter and labor, the people of Elderberry Hollow drift into their dreams like leaves floating down a stream. Each cottage glows briefly in the dusk, then darkens. Each bed holds a story, some finished, some still forming. The village breathes as one, even in sleep. And you, dear listener, are still with it, moving softly through this memory, this gentle life. You've walked the lanes, felt the brush of wool against your skin, smelled the bread, heard the rhythm of feet on stone. You've sat beside the fire, watched shadows climb the beams, and listened to voices telling stories you somehow already knew. This isn't a place you've seen. It's a place you've remembered. And in this remembering, you are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. The people of Elderberry Hollow may never know you walked among them, but you were there, watching, listening, feeling the slow turning of their days and the quiet comfort of their nights. And now, as you rest, their world rests with you. The wheel turns, the fire fades, the woolen blankets rustle softly. Sleep, dear one. You belong to this moment now, this gentle, timeless rhythm. Let go and drift with it. Night in Elderberry Hollow does not arrive with its sudden darkness. It flows in gently, like ink spilled across parchment, soft, creeping, deliberate. Light lingers for a time, hanging just above the hills like a promise not yet broken. Then, slowly, the world exhales. The last of the evening sounds fade. The clinking of crockery is replaced by the sigh of the wind. The murmur of voices behind shutters trails into silence. Laughter dwindles into yawns. And then, stillness. But it is not a silence of emptiness. It is a silence full of things. Soft, secret things that belong only to the night. Close your eyes if they aren't already. Picture the village as it is now, seen from above. A scattering of cottages, dimly lit from within, their thatched roofs dark against the starlit fields. The smoke from hearths has thinned to wisps, and the air holds a coolness that invites cloaks to be pulled a little tighter and blankets to be drawn up beneath the chin. From the chapel's small belfry, a single bell tolls once, not for service, not for warning, but simply to mark the hour. It rings like a heartbeat, slow and sonorous, drifting over rooftops and vanishing into the trees. Then, other sounds emerge. You might hear the creak of old wood, beams shifting in the roof overhead, doors expanding and settling with the night's moisture. These are the house's ways of stretching, breathing, murmuring back to the earth from which it came. Outside, a soft breeze rustles the dry leaves still clinging to the orchard trees. Some flutter loose and drift quietly to the earth, unseen and unheard, unless you are truly listening. Somewhere, a wooden shutter taps gently against its latch, a rhythmic sound like a lullaby played on an old drum. Far in the distance, at the edge of the woods, an owl calls. The sound is low and steady, repeated every few moments, like a guardian of the dark. Its echo carries, brushing against chimney tops, traveling between fields until it fades entirely. Near the stream, frogs croak intermittently, answering one another in a slow, sleepy conversation. The water itself continues its quiet journey, trickling, bubbling, slipping over stones that have never moved, not in living memory. Now and then, the faint bleat of a sheep rises from the far pens, not alarmed, not restless, just a soft sound of repositioning, of dreams interrupted and then resumed. A cow shifts its weight in the barn, and the gentle clatter of a rope against a wooden post rings out, then settles again. Closer now, near one of the cottages, a window creaks open. A young girl leans out briefly, her long braid catching the moonlight. She breathes in the night air, her eyes half closed, then draws back inside, the shutter gently closing behind her with a hollow wooden knock. A soft snore comes from somewhere, perhaps from the cottage where the tanner and his 6 sons share a loft under the beams. Their slumber is heavy and untroubled, the kind that follows a day of labor and laughter. Their snores blend together in a strange sort of harmony, accompanied only by the sound of straw rustling as someone turns over in their sleep. Near the inn, the tavern cat stalks through the grass. Her paws are silent. Only the occasional crunch of gravel beneath her pads marks her path. She pauses beside a stone wall, blinks at a moth fluttering near a torch bracket, then vanishes again into the shadows, a whisper of motion, in a world gone still. The inn itself is quiet now. Its fire has been reduced to glowing coals, its benches empty, tankards rinsed and stacked. Upstairs, travelers dream in strange tongues, dreams of places far beyond Elderberry Hollow, dreams the village will never know. But for tonight, their sleep is safe within these walls. From another cottage, you hear the rustle of parchment, someone reading by candlelight long past when they should. The flame flickers as a finger turns a page, its glow playing over the reader's face. Eventually, the candle gutters low, and the parchment slips from their hands as sleep takes hold. Even the animals have their language at night. The dog curled beside the hearth lets out a slow, steady breath, his tail twitching slightly with dreams of running. In the loft, the chickens murmur in their sleep, a quiet chorus of clucks and sighs, barely louder than the rustling of feathers. You might imagine yourself now, walking softly between these homes, invisible but present, a gentle observer. You pass by a shuttered window and hear the quiet rhythm of someone breathing. You step past a stable and feel the warm breath of a horse, even in sleep. You lean beside a stone wall and feel the cool roughness against your palm, the lichen damp with dew. The stars wheel overhead, silent and cold, but beautiful. The moonlight paints every rooftop with a silver, every path with pearl. A snail creeps slowly across a mossy stone, and the faintest sound of its journey might be heard if one were still enough. A spider, industrious even at night, spins its web between the eaves of a cottage, its silken thread catching the moonlight like a harp string. You pass the chapel again. The door's locked now, but the scent of beeswax and lavender lingers near its threshold. A candle still burns inside, a votive left for a loved one, or perhaps simply a light to hold back the dark. It flickers in its holder, casting a halo against the stone wall. In the square, the oil lamp on its post still glows faintly. Moths dance lazily in its orbit, and the circle of light seems like an island in a sea of shadow. A bat swoops low, quick and silent, then vanishes into the trees. Rain begins again, not the heavy, sudden kind, but a soft misting, the kind that clings to cloaks and blankets, that darkens the thatch without sound, that makes the air smell of earth and green things. The kind of rain that tells you it's all right to rest. Drips fall from leaves and eaves, pattering onto windowsills and stone. The puddles in the path deepen slightly, catching reflections of starlight before they ripple and blur. A hedgehog snuffles through the hedge, then curls tight beneath a root, safe from the weather and the world. And still the village sleeps. The breath of the people, of the land itself, rises and falls like tide. The fire in one hearth sighs its last flame. A door creaks faintly as it swells in the damp. Somewhere, a baby murmurs in sleep, then nestles deeper into the crook of a mother's arm. These sounds, these quiet, ancient sounds, are the heartbeat of the night. You don't need to do anything now. You don't need to understand them, to name them, or to chase them. You only need to hear them, to let them wash over you, as soft as linen, as steady as the seasons. You are not separate from this world. You are part of it, a thread in the thatch, a hush in the wind, a breath behind a shutter. You are safe here. You are welcome. The night holds you, as it holds the village, gently, tenderly, without question or demand. Let the owl's call fade. Let the rain lull you. Let the creak of old wood be the sound of trust, not fear. Let the night speak its language to you, the language of stillness, of shadow, of softness. There is nothing left to do. You have walked the village. You have listened to its heartbeat. You have heard the turning of the world in the hush between raindrops and the rhythm of dreamers at rest. The wind whispers goodnight through the trees. The water sings its lullaby to the stones, and the stars above it all keep watch in silence. Sleep now, dear one. Sleep with the village. Sleep with the sounds of night. And now, with the village deep in its slumber and the stars thick above, the dreams begin. Not just for one soul, not only for the child curled beside the fire or the shepherd wrapped in wool in his distant cottage, but for all of Elderberry Hollow. Dreams rise like mist, curling from chimneys, drifting down lanes, collecting in low corners and among the beams overhead. Beneath every thatched roof lies a story in sleep. The Thatcher family's little boy, barely 5 years old, dreams of chasing rabbits across a golden meadow. His feet are impossibly fast in the dream, his laughter weightless. The rabbits hop and pause, but they never truly flee. They are playmates, not prey. Somewhere in the background of his dream is the scent of apples, the rustle of hay, the voice of his sister calling, not to scold, but to join. His sister dreams too, though hers is quieter. She sees herself weaving a ribbon through her hair at the edge of a spring festival. The wind carries music, and petals from cherry blossoms rain gently down. She's not dancing, not yet, but she's waiting for someone to offer a hand. She doesn't know who. Maybe it doesn't matter. In the loft of the tanner's cottage, where 6 brothers lie in a jumble of straw and elbows, dreams tumble like stones down a hill. One imagines a cart full of sweets, honey cakes, roasted nuts, plum tarts lined up in rows. Another dreams of climbing a hill taller than the bell tower and shouting from the top just to hear the echo. A third rides a cow like a steed through the village square, waving a wooden sword with heroic absurdity. The dreams overlap and blur, much like their laughter during the day. Elsewhere, an elderly woman dreams of her youth, not with sorrow, but with calm. She sees her mother spinning wool in the light of a spring window, her father planting beans in dark, rich soil. The dream doesn't need action. It's a memory replayed like a favorite melody, warm and familiar, filling her heart even as her body rests still beneath the heavy quilts. The storyteller, Marin, dreams of a tale she hasn't told yet. In her dream, she walks through a forest not far from Elderberry Hollow, where the trees whisper in languages forgotten. A fox leads her along a winding trail, pausing often to look back, to make sure she follows. In the dream, she never reaches the end, but she doesn't mind. The walk is the story. The shepherd, in his lone cottage on the hill, sleeps with one hand curled near the crook of his dog's back. He dreams of stars, not just watching them, but reaching them. He dreams he can pluck them like fruit and tuck them into his pockets. He carries them back to the village and drops one beside every door, a small light for the nights to come. Even the animals dream in their own quiet way. The inn's tabby cat, curled tightly on a mat, imagines herself hunting great dragons, leaping from chair to table with fiery grace. The tavern goat, strange as it sounds, dreams of dancing, hooves clicking on wooden floors, bells swinging in rhythm. The baker's dog dreams of warm bread, because of course he does. The very walls of the cottages seem to hum with these dreams. The timbers that have held generations of sleepers now cradle them in this one moment. The straw in their beds rustles faintly with the shifting weight of sleep. Woolen blankets rise and fall with breath, and the dreams, they deepen, soften, spread. They drift beyond the houses now. They move across the village paths, brushing the mossy stones and fence posts. They slip beneath the doors of the chapel and rest in the wooden pews. They linger near the well, where moonlight dances on the water's surface. They pool around the village square, touching the steps of the inn, the bakery, the blacksmith's forge. All these places, silent now, still carry the echo of the day. And those echoes become stories in the minds of the sleepers. Perhaps you too are dreaming. Perhaps in your mind you walk again through Elderberry Hollow, not as a visitor this time, but as part of it. Maybe you carry a basket of warm rolls to a neighbor, or help tie bundles of herbs to dry. Maybe you sit by the stream and feel the water slide over your fingers, or lie in a field while the clouds drift like sheep across the sky. There is no urgency here, no task to complete, no destination that cannot wait. In the dreams of Elderberry Hollow, everything can take its time. Somewhere a candle flutters to its end, the last flame in the village, and the room it once lit goes dark. But the darkness is not empty. It is velvet. It is shelter. It is peace. The rain has passed, leaving behind damp stone, glistening leaves, and the scent of clean earth. In one cottage, a child turns in sleep, murmurs and sighs. In another, a cat stretches in its slumber, tail flicking once before stillness returns. And through it all, the dreams carry on, weaving, winding, spilling through the cracks between floorboards and whispers. They are dreams of simple joys, of summer fields and candlelight, of the taste of fresh berries and the sound of a lute on a warm afternoon, of holding hands, of laughter, of safety. They are dreams that heal, gently, without force, dreams that listen to the heart more than the mind, dreams that do not ask questions, but offer comfort in place of answers. If you find yourself still awake, that is all right. You don't need to follow every word. You don't need to keep your thoughts still. Let them wander, the way a leaf floats down a slow stream. Let them drift. Let them fade. There is no need to listen closely now. The story is still here, even if your mind drifts elsewhere. You are part of Elderberry Hollow. You are beneath a thatched roof wrapped in wool, cradled in a world that moves only gently. Nothing here can trouble you. The night is thick with dreams, and each one welcomes you. Even the stars seem slower now, dimmer, more forgiving. They blink in and out behind slow-moving clouds. The moon has moved higher, watching over all with ancient calm. It needs no attention. It simply is. Let your breath become the rhythm of this village, in and out, in and out, as steady as the stream, as slow as the wind, as deep as the earth beneath the fields. The world of Elderberry Hollow rests, and so may you. Sleep as the baker sleeps, with the scent of flour in his beard and a smile from dreams of laughter. Sleep as the potter sleeps, his hands curled like they still hold clay. Sleep as the children sleep, their dreams stitched with stories and the light of warm afternoons. Sleep as the shepherd sleeps, beneath the roof he built with his own hands. Sleep as the cat sleeps, certain that the world is warm and safe, and hers. Let your own dreams find you, as soft as candle smoke, as sure as the tide, as silent as snowfall. And if you forget the village by morning, that's all right too. Elderberry Hollow will remember you. It will be here, quiet and waiting each time you close your eyes. No path is too long. No dream is ever truly lost. For now, just rest. You are home.